Welcome everybody to the final guest speaking that we have planned for our Seniors Week festival this week. I'm very, very pleased to announce that we've got Advanced Care Planning Australia joining us to talk through preparing for an advanced care plan. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today and extend my respect to elders both past, present and emerging. As I mentioned, we are recording today's session. There will be time for questions at the end. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions. You're also welcome to pop your hand up or to pop your questions into the chat, whatever you're comfortable doing. So a very, very warm welcome to Catherine and Beth, who are going to present for us today.
Well, hello everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about getting started with advanced care planning. Beth and I are going to share the presentation, and the information we'll give you will be as applicable to yourselves as to the person for whom you're caring. Some people know something, know about advanced care planning, others know very little. Maybe you need just a little bit more information to enable you to get started with your own advanced care planning or to help somebody else with theirs. Now, just before we move on, just a disclaimer that just says that any information we provide to you will be general in nature. We can't provide any specific health or legal information, but we can certainly direct you to appropriate resources if you need that. Now, if you haven't come across Advanced Care Planning Australia before, we are a government-funded program. We're part of Austin Health. We're administered by Austin Health, and we provide a national support service for advanced care planning. We've got a very comprehensive website. We have lots of learning modules that are suitable for regular consumers like you and I, and also for health professionals as well. So today we're going to explain what advanced care planning is about. We're going to describe the role, the function and the role of the substitute decision maker, because they're a very important person in this process. We'll talk about having the advanced care planning conversation, and we'll give you some idea of what happens to someone when we follow Russell through his advanced care planning process journey. We'll also give you some information about how to document your wishes in New South Wales, and then be able to give you some further avenues that you can explore for further information. So what I want to do today is start off, we've got a short 5-minute video here called Is Love Enough? Now it poses a very interesting question for us all. Do we think that love is enough to ensure that we would automatically know what our close family or friends would want in the way of how they would want to be cared for, what treatments they would want or not want? So we'll just watch the video, and then I want you to ask yourself that question again. What do you think?
My name is Diana, and we and I are husband and wife.
My name is Anita, and John is my dad.
My name's John. I'm Quibi's husband.
So Roy gets to go on a trip of a lifetime. Where does he want to go?
I'd say Bora Bora.
No, I definitely want to go with Bora Bora.
What food could Anita not live without?
Probably curry.
Anything Asian?
He couldn't live without a lot of food.
And what about you? What food could you not live without?
Probably fruit in general.
Probably chocolate.
Just
What? Anita asking me, so what's this about? I said, I don't know.
If you can think about a moment where you pushed through a hard time together, Can you describe that?
At school, when she was being bullied, we had to see some counselling.
Just talking me through it and helping me get through it. Kind words and lots of hugs.
For me, it was probably the time that we were first trying to have our first child, I guess. We went through IVF and things like that. Becoming parents is something that we all hoped would come naturally, but it didn't to us initially, and we worked through that together.
Roy's hurt in a car accident. He needs a breathing tube for the rest of his life, and he'll never speak again. Would you consent to this?
Well, yeah, I would, yeah.
No, I wouldn't. Definitely not. I don't think I would want to burden anyone with that. So I'd rather not. Yeah.
Anita had 3 months to live. Treatment would give her an extra 2 months, but she would never see outside of a hospital. Would you consent to treatment?
Yes, this was a difficult one, this one. 2 months, you know, it's just 1 week, 2 months, any time.
Not at all. No.
That's unexpected.
I don't want to be kept in a hospital for forever.
John has had a massive stroke. Does he want a feeding tube to keep him alive, even though he'll never talk again?
No.
No, I don't. It's very important to me to be happy and functional in my life. No, I wouldn't want that to happen.
Roy's in the last stages of terminal cancer and his heart stopped. Does he want CPR?
Probably not. I don't think you would, no, I don't know.
So how do you both feel after answering those questions, and why?
It felt quite confronting in a way. But
You think about it and you talk about it just very lightheartedly, but I don't think anyone really puts a lot of thought and serious thought into it.
no.
Why do you think that some couples don't talk about this?
It's not a pleasant subject. I mean, nobody wants to dwell on the fact that they're going to die one day, and possibly in adverse or difficult circumstances.
So if I was to tell you that advanced care planning is essentially a conversation that helps your loved ones know what medical treatment to choose for you if you had a sudden event, what would you think about it now?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important, not just for yourself, but more so for your family, I think.
Definitely have to have a bit more of a talk. And it's not just about the two of us. We also
kids
have
too.
kids and all that kind of stuff, yeah. So there is a bit we need to consider, yeah, 100%.
Now, that might have been a little bit confronting, particularly if you found yourself in similar situations to those before. But what do you think now? Do you think that love is enough, and that you'd know what way would people want to be cared for? Anita and her dad obviously had a close close relationship, but Anita's dad got the decision for his daughter wrong. One of the things that we always recommend to people that you can never start your advanced care planning conversations early enough. You don't want to wait until you think you're old enough or you think you're sick enough, because by the time you are old enough and sick enough, it might be too difficult for you to do. So the time to start these conversations, to explain to another person about the things that matter to you and the things that you want taken into consideration if somebody else is making decisions about what care you would want or what care you wouldn't want. You need time to think through what matters to you. And it's more difficult if your health is deteriorating, because you often lack You often lack the time to have a considered conversation with other people and a considered conversation with yourself. So the message there is starting earlier. One of the comments was that a lot of people don't like talking about advanced care planning because it reminds us all that we're going to die. Yes, we are, but we're all going to die whether we undertake advanced care planning or not. And undertaking advanced care planning by letting others know what are those things that matter to you in your life, what are the things that matter to you for a quality of life. It may not be 100% quality, but an acceptable quality of life. To talk to other people and tell them about the things that matter are what make the difference in the way that we will die. And we're talking about a particular part of your life where you're very vulnerable and you may not have the ability to make your own decisions about what treatment you want or what treatment you don't want. Okay, everybody wants to know what are the benefits of advanced care planning to myself and my family. Well, they're quite significant benefits. Now, for yourself to feel confident that you've had sufficient discussion with the person you choose to make those decisions for you, can give you a good feeling of satisfaction of just that somebody else knows what's important to me and somebody else knows how to make those, what sort of decisions they would want, somebody else knows what sort of decisions I would want them to make on my behalf. Now, for your family, imagine what it would be like for your family if they had to make decisions for you and they really didn't know what it was that was really important to you, because what I think is important to me mightn't be important to somebody else. So it's important that if I'm making a decision for you, that I know the things that are important to you. It doesn't really matter what's important to me, but it is about what's important to you. And that can also reduce the stress for families in having that surety that these conversations have been held and that you are not, in fact, guessing. Because you think back to that video, Is Love Enough? And some of the questions they were being asked to make were quite significant, and the impact on you if they get those decisions wrong because they don't know what you want because you haven't told them. There's quite significant impacts for yourself. Okay, now we're going to introduce you to Russell. And Russell's a 73-year-old man who lives alone on his farm near a regional town. He's in good health and he continues to work on his farm. He enjoys getting away in his caravan to visit his 2 sons and their families who live interstate. His wife died a couple of years ago. He has a younger brother who lives in town who he sees on a regular basis. Russell attended a talk about advanced care planning because he'd never heard about it before and he wanted to find out more about it. After listening to the talk, he thought about his own situation. Since his wife had died, he wasn't sure who would make healthcare decisions for him if he became unwell. He'd made a will, but he hadn't thought about preparing ahead for a time when he might not be able to make his own medical decisions. Now I want to explain a little bit about capacity because it's probably something that we don't think about an awful lot. But capacity is at the centre of the advanced care planning process. And whether you have full capacity or diminishing capacity or no capacity determines the way that that process will play out for yourself. So we all make our own medical care decisions about, say, what treatments we want or we don't want at the moment because we can, because we've got a capacity, which is the ability to undertake complex decision making, which decisions about medical treatments, medical care are complex decisions. There's a 4-step, fairly standard definition that's used right across Australia to describe what capacity is. And most of us, all adults, are presumed to have capacity unless there's evidence to the contrary. And some decisions we make in life are simple decisions where the consequences of getting it wrong are really neither here nor there, and other decisions are much more complex, where the consequences of making the wrong decision can be quite catastrophic for someone. Now, you need to be able to understand the information that's provided to you about the decision to be made. You need to retain that information for as long as it takes you to consider options, ask questions, use or weigh up that information and make a decision and communicate it in some way, which doesn't necessarily just need to be verbal. Now, if you lose the capacity to make decisions, your doctors will refer to your substitute decision maker. We've got 3 levels of capacity. There's those of us with full capacity. There's those people, say for someone who's got a diagnosis of early dementia, they may have fluctuating and diminishing capacity. And then there are people who have no capacity. But for the people with diminishing or no capacity, there are separate processes available where advanced care planning under certain circumstances and using certain principles can be undertaken on your behalf. But it is a separate process than the process that people with full capacity would undertake. And you can call, if you're in that situation, you can call our advisory service and we'd be able to provide you with some more information about supported decision making. Now, we're going to be using 3 of what we call our nutshell slides, and they explain to people, they put the whole advanced care planning process into, they condense it into 3 sort of fairly simple questions. So if you became really unwell and unable to communicate your own preferences for care, who would you want to speak for you? And this is where your substitute decision maker comes in. And substitute decision maker is a generic term that's used throughout Australia. In New South Wales, it's called an enduring guardianship. Okay, so your substitute decision maker can only make healthcare decisions for you if you become unable to do it for yourself. They have no authority. They cannot make any decisions for you while you have this ability. They can consent to treatment or they can refuse treatment on your behalf. And under law, they're required to make the decision that they believe you would have made yourself, not necessarily what they would want for themselves, but the decision that they believe you would have made yourself were you still able. And that's called substituted judgment, and that's the benchmark for decision making. It means that you're asking somebody to step out of their shoes and step into your shoes and make the decision as though you were making it yourself. How do you go about choosing a substitute decision maker? Because thinking back to that video again, you think of the types of decisions they might be needing to make for you, and they're complex decisions and you want them to get it right. So the person that you appoint as your substitute decision maker or as your enduring guardian in New South Wales needs to be someone that you trust, because you're asking them to set aside what they would necessarily might want for themselves and to advocate for what you've said is important to you. They need to be accessible, live in the same city or region, or be generally fairly easy to contact. It doesn't necessarily rule out someone living overseas if they're the only option that you have. But ideally, someone who's relatively easy to contact. They need to be over the age of 18, legally an adult. They need to be the type of person who is able to make complex decisions in potentially stressful situations. And you can probably understand yourself that making decisions for someone you care about deeply is unlikely to recover. Making decisions can be pretty stressful and pretty emotional. So someone who's able to keep a clear head and think clearly in a stressful situation. And then underpinning the whole lot is that they need to understand your preferences and they need to understand about the things that are important to you. There are a couple of ways that you can find yourself a substitute decision maker. You can personally choose and complete the form for appointing an enduring guardian, and you can choose and appoint the person you want yourself And that's the ideal, and that's what we need to be aiming for. Or in the absence of a formal appointment of substitute decision maker, one can be identified from the legislated hierarchy lists that are available in every state and territory in Australia. And it's called the default decision-making list. So in New South Wales, the default hierarchy list, all the states and territories are very similar. They're lists of family relationships. They're all similar, but they are not the same. So the one that operates in New South Wales has the person's spouse, de facto or same-sex partner, where there is a close and continuing relationship. A primary carer, now that can be somebody who is, it can be a family friend or a relative, someone who comes in, makes sure that you're dressed, showered, you're fed, you're taking shopping, things like that. They can be your primary carer, but they cannot be the primary carer who is paid on a fee-for-service basis, but they can be a family or a friend who receives a caring allowance. Now, then it goes down to a friend or a relative who has a close personal relationship and is in frequent contact and has a personal interest in the person's welfare. So this only comes into operation if there is no previous formal appointment of substitute decision maker. And the doctors and other health professionals need to look at this list and go through it from 1, 2, and 3. So all of us needs to be aware, if we don't make a formal appointment and personally choose who our decision maker is going to be, to refer to the hierarchical list and identify who that person, the law, will identify as your decision maker. Some people may be happy with that, and some people may prefer to personally choose another person and appoint them. Most people do choose someone from their family, but it can be, as it says, it can be here a trusted friend. Now, this is the form that's used in New South Wales. It's got supporting information in it as well as the form itself. The authority of the guardianship appointment covers not only your healthcare matters, but also your accommodation. So that's if you're going into aged care or some other residential facility, and what they call lifestyle decisions. Now, these are decisions about whether you can go to the doctors, the dentist, whether you can have, whether you can attend the physiotherapist, those sorts of lifestyle things. They can also cover issues around people that are allowed to see you or people that are not allowed to see you, things like that. So it has a reasonably broad authority, but it does not cover financial issues. That's a separate power of attorney. Now we go back to Russell. Russell's children live a long way from his home, and he was worried about burdening his brother with this role. So he had a conversation with his 2 sons and also his brother about what was involved in acting as his substitute decision maker. In talking it over with everyone, his youngest son and brother agreed to be appointed as his substitute decision makers. Okay, now I'm just going to stop screen sharing now and hand over to Beth, who'll take us on the next part of the advanced care planning process.
Thanks, Catherine. And I've had my own technical glitches today, so let me just take a moment and share my screen. Thanks, Catherine. So we've looked at if you are unwell and unable to communicate your preferences. Catherine's taken you through looking at who you would like to speak for you. And I'm going to move on to look at what you would like them to say. And you've probably already realised that you need to do some thinking about what you would want them to say. And the kinds of things that you need to think about. Can I just make sure that the screen is being shared?
Yes, it is.
Great. Sorry about that interruption. So the kind of things that you're going to need to think about are what matters most to you in your life. And it might be things like your independence, your ability to care for yourself, make your own decisions about where you go, what you do. For some of us, it's our thinking, our cognition. That's one of the most important things to us about our lives and what we care about. A bit connected, I guess, with independence is how important self-care and mobility is to us. It may well be that we have some self-care needs where we need help, but our life remains worth living because of things like our social connections, the independence that we have with other important things to us in our lives. Another bubble shows well-being, and I think this one's a bit harder to pin down because I think well-being is going to be different for each of us. And I guess it's that well-being isn't just about, say, our health, not having anything physically wrong with us. It's about how we feel about our lives, really. And things like our social connections, things like our ability to think are going to be what contributes to our well-being. There's just sort of a few ideas of the kinds of areas to be thinking under. Another framework that connects to this one too is walking, talking, eating, thinking. Well, the thinking one's pretty obvious. Yeah, where would your line in the sand be with your thinking? If your thinking wasn't as sharp as it was, and I can put my hand up, but your life's still rich. You know, you might draw your line in the sand of, you know, look, it doesn't matter if I forget a few things, but if I don't know my family and friends, you know, if my thinking's so, you know, so far gone, then that's too much for me. With eating, how important is food in your life? Would it matter to you if you were tube fed? Or if other aspects of your life were still available, would that be something that you were okay with? The walking, I guess, captures mobility. And as I've said, I think many of us can imagine that we could have some limitations to our mobility, but still feel that our life was well worth living. And so what have I done? I've done eating, thinking, talking. How important is communication to you? Being able to communicate with people. Yeah. And so then we need to have a conversation about these things with our family or friends, carers. Certainly, if we've appointed a substitute decision maker, it's essential that that person knows what's important to us. Talking with our treating doctor or GP is important. They can talk with us about life-prolonging treatments that we might need more understanding about, or there might be aspects of our health that have certain complications that are particularly relevant for us. And so there might be something that that our doctors can help with. There's sure to be things they can help with. And there may be other advisors in our lives. And perhaps all of us have that experience of sometimes not quite knowing what we think about something and exploring it with people that we're close to, people who understand us. So asking questions. So certainly, you know, asking questions of health practitioners, and I guess asking questions of our friends and family of a way of each sharing what's important to us in case we can make a contribution to describing a person's values if that was necessary. So we need to have well, it says the conversation, but it's probably going to be conversations. So there are things that we need to let other people know about ourselves. So going back to some of the things on that what matters most to you slide, letting people know the things that are most important to you, letting them know what a life that's worth living looks like for you. And so the important things in your life. And you may, in fact, need to revisit this from time to time when there's, say, a change in your health, whereby you might be okay with something that perhaps you thought previously, you know, you weren't okay with, or vice versa. And so having conversations about your life, what a good day looks like to you. And obviously you're going to be drawing on those things in the top row about what's important to you. You might have a bucket list of things that you'd really like to achieve during your life. And all of us will have things that we value more than we value other things in our lives. And then we also need to let people know about our choices. And sometimes our choices get clarified by something that might have happened to somebody else. And so when we have conversations with our family or friends about what's important to us, letting them know perhaps that you were thinking about what happened to an aunt, for example, who might have had, say, a long-term dementia, and that can clarify for you what would be important to you in terms of medical treatment if you were in that situation. And obviously the choice that you make about your substitute decision maker, the person you appoint as an enduring guardian, it's important that you let people know about that choice as well. So Russell had a few ideas about his values and preferences, but he wasn't sure what to write on the form. He called the Advanced Care Planning Support Service and received advice about how to complete the form and how to have the talk with his family. While the conversations with his family were a bit hard, he felt relieved afterwards that he'd been able to have his say about his future care. And I guess that highlights one of those benefits that Catherine was talking about, the sort of peace of mind that having an advanced care directive can give to us. So it's pretty straightforward to access the form for New South Wales. If you go to our website, advancedcareplanning.org.au, there's actually a box on the homepage that says create your plan. When you click on that, you come to boxes for each of the states and territories in Australia. And of course, you select the New South Wales one and click on read more. Now you've only made 2 clicks by this time. And on your screen, you'll have information about the forms in New South Wales with a link directly to the form. So you get to the form in 3 clicks. And this is what the form in New South Wales looks like. It's an information booklet with the form itself in the back part of the booklet. And I'll just give you a little bit of an idea about the things that are on the New South Wales form. Obviously, recording your personal details in the first section is important. Make sure that you've completed sections like that, and obviously the later sections with signatures and dates and so on. Some of the reviews of documents show that some of that can be incomplete, so it is worth paying some attention to. And it's in the second part of the directive that you are able to talk about your values and what's important to you. And the form actually gives you some scenarios. There's, I think, probably at least half a dozen scenarios where you're asked to select whether that scenario would be bearable for you, unbearable, or unsure. And so you would initial the box sort of next to that scenario. And the kinds of things that it has on it, the first one, for example, is if I can no longer recognise my family and loved ones, I would find life ... So now I do want to say that if people selected the unbearable box for these situations, the form makes it absolutely clear that you would like treatment discontinued and be allowed to die a natural death, but also that it would be ensured that it was a comfortable and pain-free death. And I mention this because it may be that some refusals of medical treatment can make a person uncomfortable or continue discomfort. And so it's important that health practitioners are able to ensure that we nevertheless have a peaceful and comfortable death. So things like pain relief can't be refused. Another one is if I cannot feed, wash or dress myself, I would find life bearable, unbearable, not sure. And that, I guess, captures the issue of, you know, how important mobility and independence is to you. So that's the second part of the form. In the third part of the form, you can actually make specific treatment directions, and these are legally binding. So if you, for example, refused resuscitation, it is legally binding. Whereas the earlier section about your values, if that was the only part of the form you completed, those values would help determine your treatment, but not in legally binding ways. Whereas completing section 3 with directions is where you can be, if you want to be, specific about treatments. Resuscitation, CPR, is the only one specified, but you are able to select other treatments. And I guess I would really emphasise this is where conversations with health professionals about life-prolonging treatments, what they are, what they involve, are going to be very important. It's also something that we can give you some help with thinking about and directions to information about if you call or get in touch with our website or call the support service. There's also information about organ transplant and so on in the form, but I guess I've covered the essential ones. I'll just go back to it and mention the witnessing requirements. It's very important, of course, that you sign and date the document. It's not obligatory in New South Wales, but it's recommended that you also have a witness, and that witness preferably will be a health practitioner who is signing that you understand what you are doing. You can also obviously seek legal advice about this document. In fact, in New South Wales, your document could be in any form. It could be a letter. It could be, you know, some other document that you developed yourself. But obviously using the recommended form, following the recommendations on the form, are going to help ensure that your advanced care directive can be immediately recognised and implemented. So returning to Russell, he'd thought about what was important to him, he'd spoken with his family, and he'd made an advance care directive. Some years later, he experienced a sudden stroke. He was hospitalised and unable to talk to the doctors about the treatment he did or didn't want. Russell's family were relieved that he'd planned ahead and had taken the time to document his preferences. When the time came, they knew what he wanted them to do. And I guess, again, that highlights another of those benefits of advanced care planning. And that's the way that it supports the family and substitute decision maker. It's clear to them that their loved one wanted what they were able to help ensure that they had. So do the people that's important know what you want them to say? And in fact, it's not an uncommon matter for people who call the support service to talk to us about making sure that people know that they've got a document. So our recommendation is that you upload your document to your electronic healthcare record if you have one, so to My Health Record. There's your substitute decision maker should certainly have a copy, and it should be a certified copy that your substitute decision maker has. So a certified copy is a copy that is certified as a copy of the original and signed by someone who can take statutory declarations, JPs, and so on. Your family, friends, and carers can it can be very useful for them to have a copy of your document, and certainly making sure that your doctor knows that you have it, and that any hospitals that you would normally go to or that you're taken to knows that you've got an advanced care directive. And I guess having it on your My Health record makes it absolutely available to health practitioners. If one is going into a residential aged care facility, it's important that they have a certified copy, I would suggest. We now suggest that you keep a copy with your medications, particularly if you live alone. And the reason for that is that if an ambulance is called, the ambulance officers, paramedics would look for your medications, and having your advanced care plan with those is a pretty sure way of making sure that a health facility that you're transferred to will be aware that you've got it. And similarly, having a wallet card that shows that you've got one, so that if you were out and about, having your wallet card showing that you have one, showing where there is a copy, and I guess the contact number for your substitute decision maker can be very good things to have on that wallet card. The other thing that's important is to review your plan. People sort of suggest every couple of years. I mean, you may want to visit it yearly, but the other time would be when there's a change in your circumstances. That's a time to review it and make sure that you're still happy with where you've drawn your lines in the sand, and what you've shown is important to you in the document. And obviously talking to those people who are involved as well, keeping them up to date. So, by the way, with My Health Record, if you're having difficulty uploading your document, they do now have a 24/7 phone number that you could try. It's 1800 723 471, and you select option 1. So 1800 723 471. And yeah. So my take-home message, well, I actually do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge you carers. I think that the role that you do is perhaps one of the most important roles that there is, but it's also a very challenging one. So my thanks and acknowledgement of you. But I guess it's probably clear to you that the advantage, I think, of an advanced care planning is it's a way of ensuring that our lives are lived according to the values that we have, what's important to us as the particular person that we are. And I guess I'd also suggest if you're caring for someone who no longer has capacity to complete a document, there are mechanisms that you can use to help try and capture what you understand to be important to the person and to be important values for them. So I would suggest that you get in touch with us, have a look at the website. There's the Advanced Care Planning website and also the Learning website that Catherine mentioned, with resources on that, modules that people can do who are consumers, substitute decision makers, or people providing care in a professional capacity. And we also have the support service that's available Monday to Friday from 9 till 5, except for Victorian public holidays. And that number is 1300 208 582. And we're available to help you locate forms if you're having difficulty with that, or to talk about the process some more. We have a lot of resources we can offer both consumers, people who are substitute decision makers, and people working in a professional capacity. So I'm just wondering if there are some, Catherine, do you have a take-home message you'd want to make sure that...
I like using the analogy of a gift, a two-way gift. And I think that one of the most precious gifts that you can give to your family is an advanced care planning conversation, to tell them about the things that matter to you, your attitudes to medical care, how you want to be cared for when your recovery isn't very likely. It's a two-way gift that then your family, by being strong advocates for what is important to you, are able to return to you. And I think everybody likes a proposition where both parties get to win. And I think this is a win-win for everyone.
So any questions? We didn't talk about any mechanism for questions, but...
Yeah, so I'm happy if people want to unmute themselves to ask a question, and I'll also be looking at the chat too. If you're more comfortable popping it in the chat, we're happy with both.
When you know that this is what you should do, how do you make yourself start? Do you count 1, 2, 3? Or do you say, wet weekend, I did the tax last weekend, I'll do the advanced care this weekend? What do you do to motivate?
Whatever works for you. And sometimes it's a matter of you waiting until you've reached a stage of emotional readiness and you are really ready, because a lot of people know that they want to do advanced care planning, but they don't feel they've reached a level of comfort where they know that they're able to sort of go ahead and do it. So it's probably a different thing for different people.
So one of the things I would add to what Catherine said is having conversations with, so you might be, you've got an idea now of who would be your substitute decision maker if something happened to you suddenly. make sure that person has a good idea of the kind of decisions that you would like made, or what would be important to you for them to consider. You know, you might not want to make the treatment decisions, but say, you know, these are the important things. Please use these to make the decision. And as I said, in New South Wales, any piece of paper that you've got a signature on and date has substance, right? Because of the way that the law recognises advanced care planning in New South Wales. It's based on a court case where a hospital sought the court's judgment, really, on how much notice they should take of what was a refusal of treatment, right?
Okay.
And so that's what the New South Wales law around advanced care planning is based on. Consequently, you know, any bits of paper you've got written down with your signature can have weight. However, I would suggest that as well as having the conversation with people who are likely to be your substitute decision maker or the person that you appoint, is to work on recording it on the form. And in some ways, the sort of tick a box type, I've got a bit of a problem with ticking boxes for something like this, but in some ways I think it does, it kind of shows you some important things to consider and does give you a framework, and it may actually make it easier for a lot of people to complete than it would be where, you know, you had to generate the value statements, for example. Yeah.
Now, Beth, would it be a problem if someone happens to be travelling interstate when they have an unexpected health event? Would the weight of what they've documented in New South Wales hold up in a different state?
As a general rule, documents will be recognised. It's specified in some states and territories whether or not they are. In others, it's not specified, but because there's some kind of acute advanced care planning law throughout Australia, there would be some recognition. However, it may not be legally binding in the way that a directive specifying treatment decisions may be elsewhere, right? But it would be taken and it would very much inform decision making without perhaps in some states and territories having that. So we suggest when people are moving or people who live close to borders to potentially have one for each of the jurisdictions that they're most likely to end up in. And there are some jurisdictions, for Tasmania, for example, the Enduring Guardian, they will recognise a New South Wales Enduring Guardian, but the person has to be registered. They have to register. And there's that, yeah. So we obviously, as Catherine said, we can only give general information, not specific legal advice, but the attention is given to our website and the legal, advice and information. While not personal, attention is paid to what's there. And so there is information on the website under legal information about just this kind of thing that's more specific to the state and territory that you're going to and that kind of thing.
Yep. And I guess it's good practice too, if you've got an advanced care directive, to have a note of where those copies are. So if you're updating it, you're letting everybody know.
That's right, because you have to remember that the documents are yours. They don't belong to hospitals. They don't belong to doctors. They're yours. And if they're sufficiently important, well, if having your treatment, if having the treatment you want is important to you, then you need to look after those documents and store them in a safe place and let other key people, particularly your substitute decision maker, know where they're stored, and distribute them to, as Beth was talking about before, to any hospitals that you might be admitted to. Let your doctor know, things like that. But they are precious documents and they belong to each of us.
Yeah.
And, you know, despite the advice, you know, you would think that having it on an electronic health record, a Commonwealth electronic record, that should be enough in terms of, you know, covering all health professionals, doctors, hospitals and so on. But it, as perhaps many of you know, the use of My Health Record with some health facilities is variable. And so, so that's, something to consider. Bronwyn and others, something I didn't take special notice of when I was looking at the What Matters to You slide is there's the myvalues.org.au website. One of the great things about that website, so it's My Values is really what it's called, and if you put My Values and, you know, .org.au, you'll get to the site. It's been developed by Barwon Health, and it's a document that kind of helps you to work out the kinds, it uses what's important to you in sort of relation to some treatments. So it kind of has a bit of a link in some ways to the two, and it sort of produces a values profile for you. Now, it's not a legally binding document, right? But if people, I think, are sort of finding it hard to work out, oh, look, you know, oh, she said, you know, look at, you know, how important independence to you is, how important, you know, but maybe, and it hasn't helped you, have a look at the My Values website and see if that sort of helps you to the kind of values profile that it produces for you is something that you can share with people because you get an electronic record of it. And that might be an aid that you can then feed into your advanced care directive for New South Wales.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Catherine. Do we have any final questions? I'm just mindful of the time. So this has been fantastic, some very rich information, some very practical tips for everyone. I'm actually thinking that's what I might do this afternoon. But any final questions before we wrap up? And we do have those resources. We'll share it with everybody at the end of the session. So thank you so much for sharing that with us earlier. I'm just going to throw it open finally. Any last comments or questions from anyone?
You might have questions that pop up over the weekend, and you're certainly very welcome to ring our advisory line next week and have a chat with one of us.
Fantastic. Excellent, thank you.
Right.
And we also have recorded today's session, so we will eventually share it on our YouTube channel and share the link with everybody. But a very, very big thank you, Beth and Catherine. Thank you so much for your time today. Apologies for the little hiccups with the IT.
Oh, no, that's technology.
Yeah, it affects all of us, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. What would we do without it, though? But the bane of our life.
Yeah. Yep. Can't live with it. Can't live without it.
That's right. Exactly. Yep.
All right, fantastic. And thank you, Felicity, too, for organising today.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Wendy. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.